makes me a writer is reading, really, most of all. I read from when I was very, very young, and I read mostly adult literature. Not that I wasn't reading children's books, but I was reading those and mostly going for the adult books. And I think people were just so excited to see a young boy reading books that they just didn't mind, and they let me just take any books off the shelf and buy the books I wanted. So it almost became an unconscious thing in a sense, reading and writing, in terms of prose, I kind of took it on like osmosis, and I just thought I could do it straight away, more or less. So from like 8 or 9 or so, yeah. My first attempt at writing was from a really, really young age. I was 11, and so I decided to write a novel, and this was just because I thought I could, and there was no reason why I felt I couldn't. So I wrote 130 odd pages of a novel, but exercise book pages, and I gave it to my English teacher when I started secondary school. And she read it. I don't know if she read all of it, but she read it. And she told me I was going to be a novelist when I got older. So that was my first attempt, yeah. I feel like I'm following in many literary traditions, but I feel it comes from many different places. So obviously my first port of call is the Caribbean, because that's where my parents are from. So I was reading a lot of Caribbean literature, especially when I got to be a teenager. And that tied in with my other influence, which was, African American literature. I read a lot of that. And then I think also I draw from the English, London literary tradition, Dickens, everyone from Dickens to, Amos to Ian Banks. And, I think also I've got kind of like a pop culture sensibility on top of that, because when I first started reading, I just grabbed everything that I could, and mostly films and stuff. So if there was a film that I saw that I liked, I'd want to read the book. And so I was reading a lot of film books, and that has influenced me in a sense too. I think it's partly useful to label people in terms of region, in the sense that you get to see culturally where their novels have sprung from, where their sensibilities might have sprung from. I think then you have to start looking at them, because that's what they're trying to do in a sense as human beings. They're trying to say, well, this feeling, this emotion I had, which came from this place, is actually universal. And I think there's a point where you've got to put that aside and say, this is the part that I can relate to most. This is the interesting bit, the cultural references, which may not be my own, but then this is the emotional core that resonates with me as a reader. I think creating a literary language is something that all writers do. We all write from our framework in terms of, maybe our postcode or our county or our country or our city. We write in the way that people around us speak. So we're, in a way, trying to capture that voice, the voice of the place that we come from. So I think everybody does that. Everybody creates a new literary language in a sense, because it's the people that and the language that that you're trying to give voice to. I think for myself, I wasn't trying to create a new literary language. I was just saying, this is the voice of my area. This is the way that my area speaks. And it might not be the same as, your city, but there will be comparisons, A lot of the language that I was using in my first novels is actually, English slang, Cockney slang. People say things like a score and stuff like that, which is, biblical. We use that for £20, So I think I was just trying to capture a language that actually does exist. I don't feel like a creator of it, it was there already. My relationship with the Caribbean as a writer, I think, is like a grandson. You know, it's like this wise kind of grandparent figure that is not in my everyday life, but is still nurturing me and taking care of me and guiding me and showing me the way to go. So a lot of my early reading was writers like Sam Selvon, George Lamin, Earl Lovelace, who I still read up until now, Orlando Patterson, who wrote a book called Children of Sisyphus, which was just amazingly informative for me growing up. And so it's always there, kind of flavouring what I'm doing. And I always kind of hark back to that in small, tiny ways, I suppose, because the fact of the matter is that I was born here. I don't go to the Caribbean as often as my pockets can afford, or as much as I would like. So it's there, it's always there. It's like I said, a grandparent figure that's just in the background, and I engage with it at certain points. But do I see myself as a Caribbean writer? No, not particularly. I see myself as a London writer who has a very strong Caribbean heritage. I think literary festivals to the writer are like a tour is to a musician. You know, it's when you gig, it's when you meet the people, it's when you engage with your audience, it's when you promote your work, it's when you network and meet new writers. I think it's a great space for cross-cultural exchange, you know. And I don't just mean, you know, cross-cultural exchange in the sense of like two writers from, you know, different countries. You can be from the same city and have that same kind of cross-cultural exchange, you know, in terms of, like I said, regionally, you know, what area of the city you come from is going to bring up different influences. So I think they're enormously valuable for writers, you know. It's like I said, it's the way we engage with our public. Otherwise, we're just sitting at home and we're writing books and we don't see who's reading them and we don't get to talk to people. And they don't, importantly, they don't get to hear your voice, you know. So I think they're so fundamental for our growth as writers. I think the first time actually that I realised that my writing existed in another form was when I did my first reading. Because up until that point, I'd written at home, but I'd never read my work aloud. And it was only when I was on stage, being forced to read my work aloud, I was like, wow, actually, you know, there's another way of looking at my literature. And I think now, I always try to encourage students, creative writing students, to read their work aloud, if only to themselves in their room. I think as a reader and as a writer, it's really important to read books about other cultures. I just think it's part of informing our knowledge on the world, really. You know, you can't get to learn about, you know, what the world is really like for individual people, you know, emotionally, intellectually, whatever, if you don't read it in books, you know. I think you don't get that from film. You don't get the internal life of the characters from film. You get it from art, but in a kind of, in an indirect sense, you know. You're never quite sure whether you're right about what you're thinking. But in the book, on the pages, it's very plain, and you know, it's in black and white in a sense, you know. So I think that as a reader, I just learn so much about what's going on around me. And like, I might see on the news, for example, that, you know, there's a war in a certain country. But when I pick up a book that's by a writer detailing, you know, the intricate things that happened in that war, then I feel it on a different level, you know. It's more intense in a sense, you know. So I think that's really integral to my growth as a reader and as a person, and also as a writer, just to see all these different influences, you know. I really like reading Russian fiction, and I really like reading Japanese fiction, and it gives me something else to bring to my own writing. So it's really, really important for writers from different regions to express themselves and get their stuff heard by someone from a region that might be, right on the other side of the globe, Not only just to see the differences, but also the intense similarities. That's a good question. A writer for me, who really has a strong sense of place, would be Anne Petrie. She wrote a book called The Street, and that was set, I think it was in New York, Harlem, maybe in the 1920s, 1930s, I think. And that, it's called The Street, but it really was, the street became this kind of visceral, almost like a real life character that was responding to the characters that lived in and around it, and sometimes, managed to touch their lives in return, So that's a great book. And also Ian Banks' The Wasp Factory. I think that had such a real strong sense of, a rural place, this quiet, mysterious island where all these strange things were happening, so I love that. A book I would recommend for emerging writers if they want to read something that tackles, place and identity and those things, it would be Percival Everett, Erasure. I just really think it's a great exploration of a writer who is unsure of where they fit in. We all come towards art in general, I think, because we feel different. But then when you're in a marketplace that wants you to fit into a certain box, it can become very difficult. And I think he handled that with great skill through his art. He made a book about that in itself, and that was amazing. Yeah, I hardly lend anything at all, I just make sure that I don't lend my books now the way that I did before, because I lost so many. A book that I would never lend out, I should say again, because I did lend it out and I managed to get it back, was Maya Angelou's Singing and Swinging, because it was a signed copy. I met her when I was 11, 12 years old, and she actually signed that book for me. So I lent it to someone, I didn't get it back for a year, maybe 2 years, and I managed to get it back. So that definitely isn't going anywhere again. The best advice I was ever given was by my mentor in terms of writing, and it was just write for yourself. Don't worry about the industry, don't worry about readers, don't worry about anything, just write. And no matter what happens, just keep going. And that has really held me in good stead throughout my career, actually, to just keep writing no matter what happens, no matter what people say.